All right, join me on page 114 of the Social Studies textbook. We're on lesson 4 now, chapter 3, lesson 4, Daily Life in Sumer. You are there. Follow along. Oh, and by the way, the picture that I'm using for this, you'll notice looks very similar to the picture at the bottom of page 114. These are some ancient Sumerian figurines. All right, follow along on 114, you are there. It's 2300 BC. You've been learning metalworking from your father. You begin by watching him carefully melt copper and tin together to make bronze. Then he showed you how to hammer the hot bronze into different shapes. You've practiced using his tools so much that they now seem like parts of your own hands. Finally, your father says that the bronze cups you've made are good enough to sell or trade. At last, this is the day you've been waiting for. You're going to the marketplace to sell your very own cups. You wonder how many you'll sell and how much silver you'll get for them. So this is another example of an innovation. Okay, we talked about that yesterday, some of the innovations that the people in the Mesopotamian area, including the Sumerians, created. So this idea of combining metals to make a different type of metal or metalworking was an innovation of the Sumerians. Okay, before that, they didn't have these strong metalworked tools. All right, join me on page 115 now. Let's go right underneath that picture on 115 where it says the little caption underneath the picture. Follow along. Sumerian metal workers discovered how to make bronze from tin and copper. So number 1 in that picture, workers bring tin ore and copper ore from mines, so they get that directly from the earth. Number 2, workers separate the metals from the ore. Okay, the ore would just be like the rocks that are still attached to the metal. 3, tin and copper are melted in furnaces to make bronze, so the metals are combined and then melted down, and that creates a new metal. And then number 4, metal workers hammer the bronze into shape. Okay, so you can see up here, everybody has a different job. Okay. All right, follow along. 115, life in a city-state. Picture an ancient Sumerian city. Imagine the glistening ziggurat that stood in the center of the city. All around the ziggurat were temples and other buildings. The Sumerian cities were centers for trade, government, and religion, and the area around the ziggurat was where much of this happened. Without agriculture, Sumerian city-states could not have survived or grown, so they needed the farming around the city-state. People in the cities relied on the work of farmers, herders, and fishers who lived in small villages or towns near the cities. Each day they brought meat, fish, grain, and fruit to city markets. They produce more than enough food for themselves and the growing populations in the cities. So these farmers are what allow these cities to grow, because the farmers are growing enough food for their families, and then they take the surpluses to the cities, because in the cities there's no room to grow anything. So they rely on the food from outside the cities. Okay, continuing in your text. City dwellers often lived in different parts of the city, depending on the kind of work they did. For example, craft workers set up shop in a part of the city with others who did similar work. Their small shops lined the narrow streets, and often craft workers and their families lived above or behind their shops. They passed their skills down from generation to generation. Some hardly ever left their part of the city. Okay, turning the page onto page 116. So now you're going to learn about the government and their laws, how their government was set up, and some of the laws that they enacted. Okay, follow along in your text. The ruler's palace and the homes of important people were built close to the ziggurat. From the palace, officials governed the city's day-to-day activities. Besides controlling surpluses of food and collecting taxes, the officials settled disputes and took part in making new laws. They also oversaw the building of temples and monuments. Okay, stopping for a second. So, the people who governed the government, some of their jobs was controlling the surpluses of food. So making sure they had enough of each type of food, so they may go to the farmers and say, hey, we need more of this or that. Collecting taxes, so it was the government's job to collect taxes. It was the government's job to settle disputes. So if two merchants were having an argument over maybe the price of something or how much of something they got, that would be brought to the government and they would make the final decision. And they also took part in making new laws. And then it says here in the text, they also oversaw the building of temples and monuments. Okay, so they didn't do the work to build the temples and monuments, but they were like the bosses, making sure that the people were putting the stones in the correct place and whatnot. All right, continuing in your text. For the most part, everyone in Sumer had certain rights under the law. However, to pay for wars fought against other city-states, officials sometimes took away people's rights to their property. The officials claimed people's land, cattle, and boats, and made people pay taxes on everything, including burials. So they're collecting most of their tax money to build temples, things like that, but also to help pay for weapons and pay their soldiers when they are going to war against other city-states. Right, continuing in your text. In the 2300s BC, Urukagina, the ruler of the city-state of Lagash, made some changes. He created laws to prevent government leaders or the wealthy from taking advantage of the poor. About 300 years later, Ur-Nammu, the ruler of Ur, made changes related to that city-state's laws. All of the laws were written in the form of if-then statements. Ur-Nammu ordered his 7 laws carved onto a stone monument for all to see. This informed the people of Ur of both the laws and the punishment for breaking the laws. Today, Ur-Nammu's monument still exists. It is the oldest known record of ancient laws. So they would say, if you do this, then this will happen. Okay, turning to page 117, specialization and trade. So now we're going to be learning about how different people had specific jobs and how they traded goods. Okay, continuing in your text. As more people began living permanently in one place, they developed new ways of working together to make their lives easier. In Sumerian cities, this change happened in part by increased specialization in the division of labor. When people specialized, they learned all of the information and skills necessary to do one job well. Then people traded their services or the goods that they made with others. So again, now they're specializing in one certain thing, but they become very good at that one certain thing, so they can make a lot of it, and then they can trade that for food or other items that they need. Continuing in the text. A few people studied to become priests, government officials, doctors, and scribes. Managers and government officials supervised the work of others. They oversaw irrigation, building projects, and the storage and distribution of food. They also were responsible for schools and tax collection. So this is another example of some of the jobs or responsibilities of the government officials. Most officials were specially trained as scribes. Scribes kept records and wrote letters for others, and wrote down stories and songs. Because scribes controlled information, they became very powerful. Sumerian craft workers used natural resources to make everyday objects and luxury goods. Jewelers used lapis lazuli, a highly prized blue stone, to fashion necklaces. Carpenters built ships out of wood, brought them from other places. Or excuse me, built ships out of wood brought from other places. These ships then carried goods up and down the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Still others trained as weavers, potters, stonemasons, leather workers, bricklayers, and metal workers. Merchants bought and sold goods to make a living. Sumerian merchants traded within the Fertile Crescent and even as far away as the Mediterranean Sea. The Sumerians traded what they had in surplus, meaning extra: wheat, barley, and metal tools. In return, they got resources they wanted, including wood, salt, precious stones, and raw copper and tin. So the wood, salt, precious stones, and raw copper and tin weren't things that were available in the area that the Sumerians lived. So they had to trade what they did have to get those things. Okay. All right, thanks for watching, and continue on your work in Google Classroom, and I will see you on the next one.